Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. Chapter 9, The Writing on the Wall. What's going on here? What's occurring? Attracted no doubt, with the aid of Malfoy's shout, Argus Filch got here. Shouldering his way through the group. Then he saw Mrs. Norris and fell. Again, clutching his face in horror. My cat. My cat. What's happened to Mrs. Norris? He shrieked. And his popping eyes fell on Harry. You, he screeched. You've murdered my cat. You've killed her. I'll kill you. Argus. Dumbledore had arrived at the scene, accompanied by using some of different teachers. In seconds, he had swept past Harry, Ron, and Hermione, and indifferent Mrs. Norris from the torch bracket. Include me, Argus, he stated to Filch. You, too, Mr. Potter, Mr. Weasley, leave out Granger. Lockhart stepped forward eagerly. My workplace is nearest, headmaster, just upstairs, please feel free. Thank you, Gilderoy, stated Dumbledore. The silent crowd parted to let them bypass. Lockhart, searching excited and critical, hurried after Dumbledore, so did Professors McGonagall and Snape. As they entered Lockhart's darkened office, there has been a flurry of movement throughout the partitions. Harry noticed several of the Lockharts inside the photographs dodging out of sight, their hair in rollers. The real Lockhart lit the candles on his desk and stood back. Dumbledore laid Mrs. Norris at the polished floor and began to study her. Harry, Ron, and Hermione exchanged annoying looks and sank into chairs outdoor the pool of candlelight, watching. The tip of Dumbledore's lengthy, crooked nose became barely an inch from Mrs. Norris's fur. He changed into looking at her intently through his one-half-moon spectacles, his lengthy hands gently prodding and poking. Professor McGonagall became bent almost as close, her eyes narrowed. Snape loomed behind them, half in shadow, wearing a most ordinary expression. It became as though he changed into trying tough not to smile. And Lockhart changed into hovering around. All of them, making pointers. It was truly a curse that killed her, probable, the transmogrifian. Torture, I've seen it used typically, so unlucky I wasn't there, I understand. The very counter-curse that would have stored her. Lockhart's feedback had been punctuated through Filch's dry, racking sobs. He became slumped in a chair by means of the table, not able to take a look at Mrs. Norris, his face in his hands. Tons as he detested Filch, Harry couldn't help feeling a piece sorry for him, though not nearly as sorry as he felt for himself. If Dumbledore believed Filch, he would be expelled, for positive. Dumbledore turned into now muttering strange phrases underneath his breath and tapping Mrs. Norris with his wand. However, not anything befell, she endured to look as although she had been recently stuffed. I remember something very similar occurring in Wigatigo, stated Lockhart, a sequence of assaults, the total tales in my autobiography. I changed into able to offer the townsfolk with diverse amulets, which cleared the depend up right now. The photos of Lockhart on the partitions were all nodding in agreement as he talked. One of them had forgotten to cast off his hairnet. At last Dumbledore straightened up. She's now not dead, Argus, he stated softly. Lockhart stopped inside the center of counting the number of murders he had prevented. No longer lifeless, choked Filch, looking through his fingers at Mrs. Norris. But why is she all stiff and frozen? She has been petrified, stated Dumbledore. Ah. I idea so, said Lockhart. But how, I cannot say. Ask him, shrieked Filch, turning his blotched and tear-stained face, to Harry. No second year could have done this, said Dumbledore firmly. It might take dark magic of the most advanced. He did it. Filch spat, his poachy face purpling. You saw what he wrote on the wall. He determined, in my office, he knows Filch's face worked horribly. He knows I'm a squib, he completed. I by no means touched Mrs. Norris, Harry said loudly, uncomfortably conscious of absolutely everyone searching at him, together with all of the Lockharts at the partitions. And I don't even know what a squib is. Garbage, tangled up Filch. He saw my quick spell letter. If I'd speak, headmaster, stated Snape from the shadows, and Harry's feel of foreboding increased. He changed into positive, not anything Snape needed to say became going to do him any true. Potter and his friends may additionally have honestly been inside the wrong vicinity on the incorrect time, he said, a moderate sneer curling his mouth as even though he doubted it. But we do have a hard and fast of suspicious instances right here. Why? Was he within the upstairs hall at all? Why wasn't he on the Halloween ceremonial dinner? Harry, Ron and Hermione all launched into an explanation about the Death Day celebration. There had been loads of ghosts, they'll tell you we have been there. However, why now not be a part of the feast in a while, stated Snape, his black eyes glittering inside the candlelight. Why pass as much as that corridor? Ron and Hermione checked out Harry. Due to the fact, because, Harry said, his heart thumping very fast, something instructed him it would sound very far-fetched if he advised them he had been led there with the aid of a bodiless voice no person but he could listen, because we were tired and desired to go to bed, he said. With none supper, said Snape, a victorious smile flickering across his gaunt face. I didn't assume ghosts provided food and shape for living people at their events. We weren't hungry, said Ron loudly as his belly gave a big rumble. Snape's nasty smile widened. I propose, headmaster, that Potter is not being totally honest, he said. It is probably a great idea if he have been deprived of positive privileges. Until he is ready to tell us the complete story. I personally sense he have to be taken off the Gryffindor Quidditch crew till he is ready to be sincere. Virtually, Severus, said Professor McGonagall sharply, I see no motive to stop the boy playing Quidditch. This cat wasn't hit over the top with a broomstick. There is no evidence at all that Potter has accomplished anything wrong. Dumbledore was giving Harry a searching appearance. His twinkling light blue gaze made Harry experience as although he had been being x-rayed. Harmless until established responsible, Severus, he stated firmly. Snape seemed livid. So did Filch. My cat has been petrified, he shrieked, his eyes popping. I need to see some punishment. We can be capable of remedy her, Argus, stated Dumbledore, patiently. Professor Sprout recently managed you got a few mandrakes. As quickly as they've reached their complete size, I will have a potion made in an effort to revive Mrs. Norris. I'll make it, Lockhart butted in. I have to have performed at 100 instances. I may want to whip up a mandrake restorative draft in my sleep. Excuse me, said Snape icily, but I accept as true with I am the potions master at this college. There has been a completely awkward pause. You can go, Dumbledore stated to Harry, Ron, and Hermione. They went, as fast as they could without in reality walking. Whilst they had been a floor up from Lockhart's office, they turned into an empty lecture room and closed the door quietly behind them. Harry squinted at his pals' darkened faces. Do you think I ought to have told them about that voice I heard? No, stated Ron, without hesitation. Listening to voices no one else can hear isn't an awesome sign, even in the wizarding world. Something in Ron's voice made Harry ask, You do believe me, don't you? Course I do, stated Ron quick. But, you should admit it's weird. I know it's bizarre, stated Harry. The whole thing's bizarre. What became that? Writing at the wall, approximately? The chamber has been opened. What's that? supposed to mean? You already know, it rings a sort of bell, said Ron, slowly. I suppose a person told me a story about a secret chamber at Hogwarts once, might have been invoice. And what on the earth's a squib, stated Harry. To his wonder, Ron stifled a laugh. Well, it's not humorous absolutely, however, because it's Filch, he said. A squib is a person who became born right into a wizarding-owned family, but were given any magic powers. Sort of the alternative of muggle-born wizards, however squibs are pretty uncommon. If Filch trying to examine magic from a quickspell route, I reckon he have to be a squib. It would give an explanation for loads. Like why he hates college students so an awful lot. Ron gave a glad smile. He's sour. A clock chimed somewhere. Nighttime, stated Harry. We'd better get to bed earlier than Snape comes alongside and tries to frame us for something else. For a few days, the faculty ought to communicate of little else, however the attack on Mrs. Norris. Filch stored it clean in anybody's minds through pacing the spot where she were attacked, as even though he idea the attacker might come again. Harry had visible him scrubbing the message on the wall with Mrs. Scowers. All reason magical mess remover, but to no impact, the words, nevertheless, gleamed as brightly as ever at the stone. While Filch wasn't guarding the scene of the crime, he became skulking pink-eyed via the corridors, lunging out at unsuspecting students and looking to place them in detention. For such things as breathing loudly and searching satisfied, Ginny Weasley appeared very disturbed by means of Mrs. Norris's fate. According to Ron, she become a brilliant cat lover. However, you haven't truly got to know Mrs. Norris, Ron informed her bracingly. Surely, we're plenty better off without her. Ginny's lip trembled. Stuff like this doesn't regularly manifest at Hogwarts, Ron confident. They'll seize the maniac who did it and feature him out of right here in no time. I just desire he's got time to petrify Filch earlier than he's expelled. I'm handiest joking, Ron introduced unexpectedly as Ginny blanched. The attack had additionally had an effect on Hermione. It became quite typical for Hermione to spend a variety of time studying, but she changed into now doing almost not anything else. Nor ought to Harry and Ron get tons reaction from her while they asked what she turned into as much as, and not until the following Wednesday did they discover Harry had been held again in potions, wherein Snape had made him live. At the back of to scrape tube worms off the desks. After a hurried lunch, he went upstairs to meet Ron within the library, and noticed Justin Finch-Fletchley, the Hufflepuff boy from herbology, coming toward him. Harry had just opened his mouth to mention Haya when Justin stuck sight of him, grew to become abruptly, and sped off, within the contrary course. Harry observed Ron behind the library, measuring his records of magic homework. Professor Binns had asked for a 3-foot lengthy composition on the medieval assembly of ECU wizards. I don't agree with it, I'm still 8 inches short, said Ron furiously, letting move of his parchment, which sprang returned into a roll. And Hermione's performed 4 feet 7 inches, and her writing's tiny. Where is she? Asked Harry, grabbing the tape degree and unrolling his own homework. Someplace over there, stated Ron, pointing alongside the cabinets. Looking for some other ebook. I assume she's trying to examine the entire library before Christmas. Harry advised Ron about Justin Finch-Fletchley walking away from him. Dunno why you care. I idea he become a piece of an fool, stated Ron, scribbling away, making his writing as massive as viable, all that junk. Approximately Lockhart being so splendid. Hermione emerged from between the bookshelves. She looked irritable. And at ultimate seemed ready to talk to them. All the copies of Hogwarts, records had been taken out, she said, sitting down subsequent to Harry and Ron. And there's a week waiting list. I hadn't left my reproduction at domestic, but I couldn't suit it in my trunk with all the Lockhart books. Why do you want it? Stated Harry. The identical reason absolutely everyone else wants it, stated Hermione, to examine up on the legend of the Chamber of Secrets and Techniques. What's that? Said Harry fast. That's just it. I will take into account, said Hermione, biting her lip. And I can't discover the tale anywhere else. Hermione, let me examine your composition, stated Ron desperately, checking his watch. No, I won't, said Hermione, suddenly excessive. You've had 10 days to end it. I handiest want any other 2 inches, come on. The bell rang. Ron and Hermione led the way to History of Magic, bickering. History of Magic became the dullest situation on their agenda. Professor Binns, who taught it, became their most effective ghost teacher, and the most thrilling aspect that ever occurred in his training was his getting into the room through the blackboard. Historic and shrunk, many humans stated he hadn't observed. He changed into lifeless. He had honestly were given as much as teach someday and left his body behind him in an armchair in front of the staffroom fireplace. His routine had now not numerous within the slightest when you consider that these days became as uninteresting as ever. Professor Binns opened his notes and commenced to examine in a flat drone like in vintage vacuum cleanser until nearly every person within the class was in a deep stupor, from time to time coming to lengthy enough to replicate down a call or date, then falling asleep again. He had been speaking for half an hour when something came about that had by no means happened earlier than. Hermione positioned up her hand. Professor Binns, glancing up within the center of a lethal dull lecture on the Worldwide Warlock Convention of 1289, seemed amazed. Leave out, Granger, Professor. I was questioning if you may tell us something about the Chamber of Secrets, said Hermione in a clear voice. Dean Thomas, who had been sitting along with his mouth hanging open, watching out of the window, jerked out of his trance. Lavender Brown's head came up off her hands, and Neville Longbottom's elbow slipped off his desk. Professor Binns blinked. My situation is history of magic, he stated in his dry, wheezy voice. I cope with statistics, omit Granger, no longer myths and legends. He cleared his throat with a small noise like chalk snapping and persevered. In September of that year, a subcommittee of Sardinian sorcerers. He stuttered to a halt. Hermione's hand changed into waving in the air once more. Leave out Grant? Please, sir, don't legends constantly have a foundation in reality? Professor Binns became looking at her in such amazement, Harry became certain no pupil had ever interrupted him earlier than, alive or dead. Properly, stated Professor Binns slowly, yes, one may want to argue that, I suppose. He peered at Hermione as though he had never seen a scholar. Well, earlier than. But, the legend of which you communicate is such a very sensational, even ludicrous tale. However, the whole class was now placing on Professor Binns's every phrase. He seemed dimly at all of them, every face became to his. Harry should inform he changed into absolutely thrown by using such an uncommon display of hobby. Oh, very well, he stated slowly. Permit me see, the Chamber of Secrets. You all understand, of course, that Hogwarts changed into based over 1,000 years in the past. The correct date is unsure, by way of the 4 best witches and wizards of the age. The 4 college homes are named after them. Godric Gryffindor, Helga Hufflepuff, Rowena Ravenclaw, and Salazar Slytherin. They constructed this castle together, a long way from prying Muggle eyes, for it became an age while magic turned into feared with the aid of common humans, and witches and wizards suffered much persecution. He paused, gazed blearily around the room, and endured. For some years, the founders worked in harmony collectively, looking for youngsters who confirmed symptoms of magic and bringing them to the castle to be knowledgeable. However, then disagreements sprang up between them. A rift began to grow between Slytherin and the others. Slytherin wanted to be extra selective about the students admitted to Hogwarts. He believed that magical mastering ought to be kept within all magic families. He disliked taking college students of Muggle parentage, believing them to be untrustworthy. After a while, there has been an extreme argument on the concern among Slytherin and Gryffindor, and Slytherin left the faculty. Professor Binns paused once more, pursing his lips, searching like a wrinkled vintage tortoise. Dependable historical sources tell us this an awful lot, he stated. However, these sincere information were obscured with the aid of the fanciful legend of the Chamber of Secrets and Techniques. The tale goes that Slytherin had constructed a hidden chamber inside the castle, of which the alternative founders knew not anything. Slytherin, according to the legend, sealed the Chamber of Secrets and Techniques so that none would be capable of open it till his own authentic heir arrived at the college. The inheritor by myself could be able to USA the Chamber of Secrets and Techniques, unleash the horror inside, and use it to purge the faculty of all who had been unworthy to have a look at magic. There has been silence as he finished telling the story, however it wasn't the usual, sleepy silence that crammed Professor Binns's training. There was unease in the air as anyone endured to observe him, hoping for more. Professor Binns appeared faintly irritated. The entirety is errant nonsense of direction, he stated. Clearly, the faculty has been searched for proof of the sort of chamber, commonly, by means of the maximum learned witches and wizards. It does no longer exist. A tale informed to frighten the gullible. Hermione's hand changed into back inside the air. Sir, what exactly do you mean by using the horror inside the chamber? That is believed to be a few type of monster, which the inheritor of Slytherin alone can control, stated Professor Binns in his dry, reedy voice. The elegants exchanged fearful appears. I let you know, the thing does not exist, stated Professor Binns, shuffling his notes. There's no chamber and no monster. However, sir, said Seamus Finnegan, if the chamber can simplest be opened by using Slytherin's actual inheritor, nobody else might be able to locate it, would they? Nonsense, O'Flaherty, stated Professor Binns in an annoyed tone. If a long succession of Hogwarts headmasters and headmistresses haven't found the element. However, Professor, piped up Parvati Patil, you'd likely have to use darkish magic to open it. Just due to the fact a wizard doesn't use dark magic doesn't mean he can't omit Pennyfeather, snapped Professor Binns. I repeat, if the likes of Dumbledore. However, perhaps you've got to be associated with Slytherin, so Dumbledore couldn't, began Dean Thomas, but Professor Binns had had sufficient in order to do, he said sharply. It's far a delusion. It does not exist. There's not a shred of proof that Slytherin ever constructed so much as a mystery broom cupboard. I regret telling you this sort of silly story. We can go back, in case you please, to history, to strong, believable, verifiable truth. And within 5 minutes, the elegance had sunk lower back into its usual torpor. I always knew Salazar Slytherin became a twisted old loony, Ron advised Harry and Hermione as they fought their way through the teeming corridors at the quit of the lesson to drop off their baggage earlier than dinner. However, I in no way knew he started out all this pure blood stuff. I wouldn't be in his house if you paid me. Without a doubt, if the Sorting Hat had attempted to position me in Slytherin, IDVE got the educate instantly again domestic. Hermione nodded fervently, but Harry didn't say whatever. His belly had just dropped unpleasantly. Harry had never informed Ron and Hermione that the Sorting Hat had severely considered setting him in Slytherin. He ought to take into account, as Although it were the day prior to this, the small voice that had spoken in his ear whilst he'd located the hat on his head 12 months earlier then, "You may be wonderful, you realize, it's all right here in your head, and Slytherin could help you on the manner too. Greatness, absolute confidence, approximately that." However, Harry, who had already heard of Slytherin residents' recognition for turning out darkish wizards, had notioned desperately, not Slytherin. And the hat had said, "Oh, nicely, if you're positive, better be Gryffindor." As they were shunted alongside inside the throng, Colin Creevey went past. "Howdy, Harry." "Hello, Colin," stated Harry mechanically. Harry, a boy in my class has been pronouncing your..." But Colin became so small he couldn't combat in opposition to the tide of human beings. Bearing him closer to the brilliant corridor, they heard him squeak, "See you, Harry," and he was long past. "What's a boy in his class announcing approximately you?" Hermione wondered. "That I'm Slytherin's inheritor, I anticipate," stated Harry, his belly dropping every other inch or in order. He all at once remembered the way Justin Finch-Fletchley had run far from him at lunchtime. "Human beings right here'll trust whatever," stated Ron in disgust. The crowd thinned and they have been able to climb the subsequent staircase without difficulty. "Do you really think there's a chamber of secrets?" Ron asked Hermione. "I don't recognize," she said, frowning. "Dumbledore couldn't therapy Mrs. Norris, and that makes me suppose that whatever attacked her may not be properly human." As she spoke, they turned a nook and located themselves at the cease of the very hall in which the assault had befell. They stopped and looked. The scene changed into simply as it had been that night, besides that there was no stiff cat striking from the torch bracket, and an empty chair stood towards the wall bearing the message, "The Chamber of Secrets has been opened." "That's wherein Filch has been preserving shield," Ron muttered. They checked out each different. The corridor became deserted. "Can't harm to have a poke round," stated Harry, dropping his bag and getting to his arms and knees so that he may want to crawl alongside, attempting to find clues. "Scorch marks," he stated, "right here, and here." "Come and observe this," said Hermione. "That is humorous." Harry got up and crossed to the window, subsequent to the message on the wall. Hermione began pointing on the topmost pane, where round 20 spiders had been scuttling, apparently preventing to get through a small crack. A protracted, silvery thread became dangling like a rope, as though they'd all climbed it of their hurry to get outdoor. "Have you ever visible spiders act like that?" said Hermione wonderingly. "No," said Harry. "Have you ever, Ron?" "Ron?" He seemed over his shoulder. Ron turned into status, nicely lower back, and regarded to be combating the impulse to run. "What's up?" stated Harry. "I don't like spiders," stated Ron tensely. "I by no means knew that," stated Hermione, looking at Ron in surprise. "You've used spiders in potions masses of instances." "I don't mind them useless," stated Ron, who became carefully searching everywhere, however, at the window. "I simply don't like the manner they move." Hermione giggled. "It's now not humorous," said Ron, fiercely. "If you have to recognize, while I was 3, Fred grew to become my teddy bear into a great huge filthy spider, due to the fact I broke his toy broomstick. You wouldn't like them either, if you'd been protecting your endure, and all at once it had too many legs, and..." He broke off, shuddering. Hermione became obviously still trying no longer to chortle. Feeling they'd better get off the challenge, Harry said, "Don't forget. All that water on the ground? Wherein did that come from?" "Someone's mopped it up. It become about here," stated Ron, convalescing himself to stroll some paces past Filch's chair and pointing degree with this door. He reached for the brass doorknob, however withdrew his hand as even though he'd been burned. "What's the problem?" said Harry. "Can't pass in there," stated Ron gruffly. "That's a women restroom." "Oh, Ron, there received to be each person in there," said Hermione, standing up. "And coming over. That's Moaning Myrtle's region. Come on, let's have a appearance." And ignoring the large out-of-order sign, she opened the door. It became the gloomiest, maximum miserable lavatory Harry had ever set foot in. Under a big, cracked, and noticed reflect were a row of chipped sinks. The floor became damp and meditated the stupid light given off with the aid of the stubs of a few candles, burning low in their holders. The timber doors to the stalls had been flaking and scratched, and one in every of them became dangling off its hinges. Hermione put her palms to her lips and prompted toward the stop stall. Whilst she reached it she said, "What's up, Myrtle, how are you?" Harry and Ron went to appearance. Moaning Myrtle became floating above the tank of the restroom, choosing a niche on her chin. "That is a women restroom," she stated, eyeing Ron and Harry suspiciously. "They're not girls." "No," Hermione agreed. "I simply desired to reveal them how, exceptional. It's miles in here." She waved vaguely on the grimy vintage replicate and the damp floor. "Ask her if she noticed whatever," Harry mouthed at Hermione. "What are you whispering?" stated Myrtle, watching him. "Nothing," stated Harry fast. "We wanted to ask. I wish human beings would prevent speak me in the back of my back," stated Myrtle, in a voice choked with tears. "I do have feelings, you recognize, although I am lifeless." "Myrtle, no person wants to disillusion you," said Hermione. "Harry only. No person wants to upset me." "That's a terrific one," howled Myrtle. "My life become nothing however misery at this area, and now human beings come alongside. Ruining my death." "We desired to ask you in case you visible whatever funny recently," stated Hermione Speedy, due to the fact a cat became attacked right outdoor near the front door on Halloween. "Did you notice everybody close to here that night time?" said Harry. "I wasn't paying interest," said Myrtle dramatically. "Peace disillusioned me a lot. I came in right here and attempted to kill myself. Then, of direction, I remembered that I'm already useless," said Ron helpfully. Myrtle gave a sad sob, rose up inside the air, grew to become over, and dived headfirst into the toilet, splashing water all over them and vanishing from sight, although from the course of her muffled sobs, she had come to rest somewhere inside the U-bend. Harry and Ron stood with their mouths open, however Hermione shrugged wearily and stated, in reality, that became almost pleased for Myrtle. "Come on, let's cross." Harry had barely closed the door on Myrtle's gurgling sobs, while a loud voice made all three of them leap. "Ron!" Percy Weasley had stopped useless at the head of the stairs, prefect badge a gleam, an expression of whole surprise on his face. "That's a women bathroom," he gasped. "What were you?" "Simply having a go searching," Ron shrugged. "Clues, you understand." Percy swelled in a way that reminded Harry forcefully of Mrs. Weasley. "Get away from there," Percy said, striding in the direction of them and beginning to bustle them alongside, flapping his arms. "Don't you care what this seems like? Coming again here while all and sundry's at dinner." "Why shouldn't we be here?" said Ron hotly, stopping quick and glaring at Percy. "Pay attention, we never laid a finger on that cat." "That's what I informed Ginny," said Percy fiercely, "however, she still appears to think you're going to be expelled. I've in no way seen her so upset, crying her eyes out. You may think about her, all of the first years are thoroughly overexcited by this enterprise." "You don't care about Ginny," stated Ron, whose ears were now reddening. "You're simply worried I'm going to mess up your chances of being head boy." 5 points from Gryffindor," Percy stated tersely, fingering his prefect badge. "And I hope it teaches you a lesson. No extra detective work, or I'll write to Mum." And he strode off, the again of his neck as purple as Ron's ears. Harry, Ron, and Hermione chose seats as a long way as possible from Percy in the common room that night time. Ron changed into nevertheless in a very horrific temper and kept blotting his charms homework. When he reached absently for his wand to get rid of the smudges, it ignited the parchment, fuming nearly as much as his homework. Ron slammed the usual ebook of spells, grade 2 shut. To Harry's wonder, Hermione accompanied Match. "Who can it's, though," she said in a quiet voice, as though persevering with a communication they'd just been having. "Who'd want to frighten all of the squibs and muggleborns out of Hogwarts?" "Let's assume," said Ron in mock puzzlement. "Who will we understand who thinks muggleborns are scum?" He looked at Hermione. Hermione appeared lower back, unconvinced. "In case you're speaking about Malfoy." "Of Pathime," said Ron. "You heard him, you'll be next, mudbloods. Come on, you've simplest got to observe his foul rat face to realize it's him." "Malfoy, the heir of Slytherin," stated Hermione skeptically. "Study his own family," said Harry, "last his books, too. Everything of them had been in Slytherin, he's always boasting approximately it. They could without problems be Slytherin's descendants. His father's simply evil sufficient. They might have had the key to the Chamber of Secrets for centuries," stated Ron, handing it down, father to son. "Well," said Hermione cautiously, "I assume it's feasible." "But how can we show it?" stated Harry darkly. "There is probably a manner," said Hermione slowly, dropping her voice, nonetheless. Further with a quick glance across the room at Percy. "Of direction, it'd be difficult. And dangerous, very dangerous. We'd be breaking approximately 50 college guidelines, I anticipate. If, in a month or so, you feel like explaining, you will allow us to know, gained you," said Ron irritably. "All proper," said Hermione coldly. "What we'd need to do is to get in the Slytherin common room and ask Malfoy some questions. Without him knowing it's us." "But that's not possible," Harry stated as Ron laughed. "No, it's no longer," stated Hermione. "All we'd want might be some polyjuice potion." "What's that?" stated Ron and Harry, collectively. "Snape noted it in class a few weeks ago. Do you think we've got nothing higher to do in potions than pay attention to?" "Snape," muttered Ron. "It transforms you into someone else. Think about it. We may want to trade into 3 of the Slytherins. No one might realize it became us. Malfoy could probably inform us something. He's probably boasting approximately it within the Slytherin. Not unusual room right now, if simplest we could hear him." "This polyjuice stuff sounds a piece dodgy to me," said Ron, frowning. "What if we had been stuck looking like 3 of the Slytherins all the time?" "It wears off after some time," stated Hermione, waving her hand impatiently. "But getting preserve of the recipe will be very tough." "Snape said it became in a e-book known as Most Potendy Potions, and it's bound to be in the constrained section of the library." There was simplest one manner to get out a e-book from the confined section. You wanted a signed notice of permission from a trainer. "Difficult to peer why we'd need the book, surely," stated Ron, "if we weren't going to try and make one of the potions." "I think," stated Hermione, "that if we made it sound as even though we were simply interested in the idea, we would stand a risk." "Oh, come on, no teacher's going to fall for that," said Ron. "They'd need to be virtually thick."